This program is brought to you by the Georgia Neurosurgical Institute. For over 50 years, rendering neurosurgical care to patients of all social conditions, treating complicated problems involving the brain, spine, spinal cord, and peripheral nerves, endeavoring to encourage quality care, medical research, innovation, and education on a local, national, and international basis.
Good evening. My name is Joe Sam Robinson. It's my pleasure to have with us once again the rather famous, rather erudite local figure, Dr. Buck Melton, whose political aspirations may well impel him to another location, far to the north of us.
You're going to make me go to Washington?
Well, I mean, I don't know. Maybe
I thought you liked me.
Vice president. I see that opening now. I haven't heard of a person that's expressed the smallest interest in the job. And it seems to me you'd have a lot of advantages if you put your name in the hat early on.
Could I get my son a job at Burisma?
You might be able to do something there. Okay, well, now, wondering. Okay, Buck, moving past that conversation, one of the advantages that you might have is you're a relatively young person, and presumably your brain is up to it. You can hit the ball out of the park on occasion, and your mentation would be okay to be in a high office. I could make that as a general statement. However, I think we've both commented on what happens from, I think you from the legal point of view and myself from the medical point of view, the implications of a demented president or a very elderly, intellectually challenged political figure, both as possibly in the White House or possibly on the Supreme Court. And I'll toss you the ball at this point, and maybe you can say, is there any way the public can be protected from a demented president? What protections do we have?
Well, I suppose the first protection is not to vote him into office to begin with. But of course, how do you know? I mean, dementia can accelerate. It takes place over a period of years. So I think what you're asking me about, that's really sort of your area, but what you're asking me is what if you end up with one somehow? Can you get him out?
Yes.
And that would be the province of the 25th Amendment, yes, which was passed, became ratified as part of the Constitution in the mid-1960s after the assassination of John F. Kennedy. And it's a fairly complex amendment, but it essentially breaks into two parts. One, if the president himself knows that he is incapacitated somehow or going to be incapacitated. So, for instance, if I'm president, forget this vice president stuff.
Okay, just go right for home
Pretend I'm president for a minute.
Slide into home plate.
Bloomberg can come in late.
Slide into home plate. Yes.
And let's say that I have to go in for colonoscopy and have polyps removed. I know it sounds base, but people this age,
sure,
that happens a lot. And that has, in fact, happened to some of our past presidents. I'll be under a general or sedated. I won't be able to make decisions. I can actually let Congress know I'm going to be out of it, and then the vice president would serve for that time as acting president.
Yes.
And then once I come out of it and I come to myself again, I let Congress know.
Right.
I'm back to myself and I take the job back over. There is another provision in the 25th Amendment. What if I don't want to go peacefully and quietly?
Yes.
The cabinet can get together and tell Congress he's lost it. And then the Congress can vote to take the power from me and make the vice president acting president. The fun part comes if I insist that no, I do not have dementia and I'm doing just fine, and I so inform Congress. Then Congress gets to decide which one it's going to believe, the president who doesn't want to go or the cabinet who says he has to.
Now, is this going to be a replay of the impeachment arrangement? Would it go first through the House and then to the Senate, or how would Congress push the button on this?
I believe it's just a vote in both houses, if I remember correctly. I'd have to look at the technical deal.
Yes.
And I think it's a 50% simple majority vote. But the interesting thing is, we've already sort of kind of gone down that road with Trump. That summer before last, the anonymous source wrote the anonymous editorial op-ed in the New York Times saying that there was discussion at the highest levels about trying to incapacitate Trump this way. And,
yes.
and it wasn't for dementia, not for dementia. I'm not sure if it was for we don't like his politics or we truly think that there's some sort of pathology there. But of course it didn't fly. It never even got to Congress. But the fact that somebody brought up that there was, it's not stretching things too far to say palace coup.
Yes. A coup d'etat,
Yes.
saying, and if you couldn't, I mean, so would that be a road to take if it was impossible to impeach a president? Then you could try the 25th Amendment. If the cabinet could be suborned and
Yes.
you had enough power, he could then, the president could then be tossed out and presumably could still come back. Is that right? Well, I feel a lot better now, and I've taken a little break. I went to play some golf, and I'm more relaxed. And,
yes, so it could be. There's certainly the possibility for politics there. It's never been done, so we don't know. It's uncharted territory. But as the population ages, and,
yes.
and it's a statistical certainty that the older you get, the less agile your brain is, and the physically more rundown and tireder you get.
Yes.
That we're going to end up with a president at some point who either voluntarily or involuntarily, that there's a problem there just due to age-related
Well, it's
infirmities.
complicated, isn't it? So the body, I think you correctly say, the body is, all our organ systems are getting, as our birthdays run along, they're getting weary, they're trying to rest, maybe they're not quite can't shoot those three-pointers as well as they might have. And there are all kinds of cacophony of different stimuli that's taking place as the age. This doesn't work, that doesn't work, this hurts, that doesn't hurt. And the medicine that people take can have impacts on cognition. Also, disrupted sleep patterns. The amount of sleep apnea that's present in older people, it's a substantial number. And then you could also say, what about if it's true, and maybe this person's wits are just fine, he's not undergoing any kind of operation. However, every night he puts a fifth of Old Crow down or whatever, drinks himself silly or herself silly. And during that period, the wits aren't there. That's a question that's out there, isn't it? If you're in a nuclear age, this could happen, that could happen. One could either be on some kind of medication, if nothing more than cold medication, and or just celebrating a birthday a little too robustly and jumping around a little bit, a bad headache, the flu. I mean, all these things would put a high decision maker at some kind of disadvantage. And there are lots of stories about things like that. Maybe we can just go through a few of them. One was allegedly, I believe this is the true case, that John F. Kennedy has had terrible health. He had all kinds of problems. And he was Addisonian, he was getting steroids to stay alive, different kinds of medication, and
the back problem.
Chronic pain, terrible
and so
pain.
he's on pain meds and apparently washed it down with alcohol.
And meeting with Khrushchev. And there our guy is, and he's been sort of, at least allegedly, I mean, maybe this is an apocryphal story, on different kinds of medication to get him through that, and that Khrushchev thought, well, this guy, something's amiss with him, I can then go into Cuba. Well, that may not be a totally true story, but nevertheless, it can be said that his health was frail, and there must have been periods when his judgment was impaired. And in an imperial presidency, are we ready for that? And as I ask that question, I'll throw one other story in, which I'm sure you're aware of, and that's Woodrow Wilson, when he had a stroke. And his wife basically ran the country for about a year. So he was totally incapacitated. And in an earlier time, that might not have made such a big difference. But now, with the impact that a president's whim has, it's something of substantial consequence. And I've been through this a little bit. I'll ask you, is there something that could be done about this? And should something be done?
Well, it would probably take a constitutional amendment. And we already have the 25th Amendment regarding the presidency, but that one takes time. It would actually, the reason we got that amendment, as I say, was in response to Kennedy's assassination. The original wording of the Constitution didn't have the same level of urgency. It didn't go into the same detail because, of course, when the Constitution was written, the president's powers were much less. There was no nuclear threat. Things moved at a more slower pace. But when Kennedy was assassinated, from what I can tell, having read the testimony of his attendings, he had some degree of heartbeat and respiration for as long as 30 minutes after the shot, which means he's technically, I suppose, president. So what if it had been a Soviet plot? They could have used that window to launch a first strike, and because we were effectively decapitated. No pun at all intended. Right. And so at that point, when Johnson became president, there had already been some talk about this, and he says, we've got to fix this because the next runners up after Johnson were the Speaker of the House and the President pro tem of the Senate, and they were in their 80s.
Yes.
So that's how we got the 25th Amendment. But to deal with age-related degenerative cognition, I don't know if that's a technical term or not, you need to amend the Constitution.
Yes.
You need to say that the easiest way to do it would just be to put in a maximum age. We have minimum ages for the House of Representatives and for the Senate and for the presidency. It's 25 for the House, 30 for the Senate, 35 for the presidency. And the idea is, it's not that the founders said the brains were still maturing. They didn't know any neurology back then. Right. But they knew that there was a lack of judgment. There was a lack of a life experience.
Right, yes.
And so the easy, bright line way to do it would be to say, all right, once you hit age 70, or I'd say at maximum age 75,
yes,
it'd have to be argued out, maybe even 65.
Yes.
You're disqualified. And yes, you would remove some qualified individuals from the pool by doing that, but you remove some qualified individuals from the pool already on the young side.
Yes.
It's just the cost that you pay, the price you pay for protecting us from an infirm brain.
Yes, well, we could think about that. I believe the Catholic Church, if I can understand this, or maybe it's the case when you're 75 and you're a bishop, or archbishop, I think you submit your resignation.
Yes.
And the Pope can take it if you wish, or you can take it or leave it. But
yes,
when that doesn't sound such a bad idea. Mm-hmm. When you turn 75, maybe for federal judges. And we also, it brings up the issue about the Supreme Court and Franklin Roosevelt. And he had that idea earlier, did he not, about worrying about judges that were getting up septuagenarians?
Yes, but that was more of an ostensible argument. And I would say it's very interesting that there is no minimum age requirement for federal judges, to at least my knowledge, not constitutional ones. And I've always thought that interesting. And I suppose it's because the courts are seen as the repository of wisdom, and in some sense, the older the better. But yes, in the 1930s, there were a good many septuagenarians on the court, and Roosevelt didn't like them because it was the older judges with the older style of jurisprudence who kept on striking down the New Deal laws. And so, having just won re-election, Roosevelt floated the court packing plan, which he vehemently denied was a court packing plan. He simply said these judges are old, their workload's too heavy, and by the way, they're out of touch. So we can't get them out except through impeachment. But what we can do is add to the size of the Supreme Court. The Congress gets to determine the size of the court. So for every judge who is over the age of 70, I propose that we add a seat to the court, which would have raised the court from, if I remember correctly, from 9 to 15. And of course, Roosevelt would get to make all the new appointments, and those judges would vote his way. And that is the first time that, as president, he overreached himself. He got slapped down very hard for that, and so he should have.
Yes. Well, I mean, I guess we're getting into the whole question that confronts us these days about how healthcare is basically keeping us alive, keeping us fairly frisky, a problem that earlier generations certainly didn't deal with such issues. At the time of the formatting of the Constitution, 1780s, maybe our life expectancy was the late 30s. Now it's in the late 70s, so we have 40 years of extra life. There are plenty of senior citizens around. There are different ways that their brain is, you can do things better. You can protect your brain. You can keep your blood pressure under control. You can have your diabetic issues dealt with. You can stay on Plavix, exercise, good diet. So there are lots of ways to keep people going. And there's a huge population of productive citizens out there that are continuing to work, maybe out of necessity. And one can look at the situation in Japan, which their demographics require these very senior citizens still have active and do things. But the question comes up, is there some kind of bright line marker to say that you can't do this kind of work because of age, impediments, some kind of test you took? And I think, for instance, with airline pilots, there is a limitation on how old they can be. They're sort of forced into retirement. Presumably their reflexes aren't quite as good. I would assume that's the reason.
Or is it a statistical reason, just that the chances go up?
As the older you get, yes. And the other thing, it used to be, I'd say in medicine, if you were a surgeon and you were after 65, the idea was that you had to get, your colleagues had to say it was okay for you to continue, and there's some degree that still happens. But there's a law out there, if I'm correct on this, to protect older people from such events occurring, and I don't believe it's mandatory. And I think there are relatively few places in society where there is an age limit. Can you think of any? I mean, what college professors? Or, I mean,
certainly school policies, but there's, to my knowledge, I mean, you certainly can't draw Social Security until a certain age, but there's not a mandatory you've got to quit working age, at least to my knowledge.
Very little, very little.
And I think we ought to distinguish, and we were talking about the Supreme Court. I do think we ought to distinguish between the president on the one hand and the other two branches, the courts and Congress, because the president, first of all, is a single individual, that if a congressman's got a problem, other congressmen can presumably step in and maybe urge him to ease him out or take over some of the workload. And it's also more of a deliberative body. The courts are a very deliberative body. With the president, it's split-second decisions. That by the 1950s, the United States could be almost literally obliterated within a matter of hours. You don't have time to sit around for weeks or months or talk about it. By the 70s, and the Soviets have ballistic missile submarines, it's down to minutes. And today with cyber attack, it can be instantaneous. The brain of the president does not have time to sit and reflect. It's got to be on top of things. So.
An issue that's out there is that it's such a powerful job. So many decisions are of enormous consequence. Suddenly, a person comes off the street and rolls into the Oval Office. I wonder. It seems in the national interest that a huge amount of attention be paid as soon as the new person is elected, a huge amount of attention. He's in there, this is your desk, this is the way we do it. I don't think that's the case. I mean, but it would appear to me that would be an important event. Another question to ask, which may be germane, making my joke in your case, Bucky, but what kind of preparation intellectually has the person had? And what is his team like? I think, and we can quote different presidents, we can remember them, but the team really does things. And I can imagine a circumstance where the president is, shall we say, near dementia. The president is able to say hello, shake hands, possibly make a joke or two, take a nap, but the ability to hack his or her way through a huge manuscript and to probe complicated economic and, I guess, issues of war and peace, that could be a real issue, could it not? And the team that the president puts together, presumably, obviates the president's necessity to do that. I mean, say, well, Mr. President, I'm your advisor here. Here are your options, let's say in the Middle East with Iran. We can go to nuclear war and blow them up. It's a good chance we'll lose 50 million people. Or we could just blockade a port for 2 days. Those are your options. And so well, I guess let's just blockade a port for 2 days. And so the people around the president can really tilt his judgment in different ways.
Well, I think that's true with a young and agile brain in the Oval Office.
Yes.
Where you're getting your flows of information, and there has been some scuttlebutt, and it's hard to tell how true this is. But the recent killing of Soleimani, the Iranian top general.
Yes.
And some people have used the word assassination there. We don't need to get into that right now.
That's a good question. It's parsing killing and assassination. How close are they? I just killed the person or I assassinate.
Yeah, it'd be a good
in
one.
In a war, do you assassinate people or do you kill them?
Yes.
I don't know.
But I've heard it put forward that Trump's policy advisors gave him a range of options. And this one was the extreme option that was put on the table to make the other one seem more palatable. And Trump said, "Oh, good, let's go for that one." Let's go. And so information flow, I think, is a problem with any president of any age in this day and age. But it is certainly magnified when you've got someone older. He's more impressionable. He's more out of it. What do you do in a situation like that?
Well, I guess what I'm getting into a little bit here is that if we're getting, and we can look at the contenders for the presidency now, a big number of them are septuagenarians. A big number. There are one or two younger people there.
Actually, probably too young. It's the opposite problem.
Right,
Buttigieg is what, 37?
He's just over the limit. And, there are those issues, but the question is, if you put a person in that role, do they have to be like athletic? Do they have to be able to run upstairs all day long, only sleep 2 hours a day, read thousands of books at a single sitting? How many people are like that? And it would appear it's almost impossible to get a person in that position that has all the extraordinary virtues the public would accept. Therefore, there needs to be some kind of knowledge about what's going on with so much power in one place. And it brings up the idea of the checks and balances being quite important, which presumably we're seeing the impact of that. But the imperial presidency, in my opinion, needs some checks and balances. It does. I mean, no matter what party you're in, if the president makes extreme, quick maneuvers on either the right or the left. I mean, certainly the situation now is with Trump, but it could certainly change with the Democrats could put someone in that's equally as confrontational.
Yes. Well, let's fast forward 50 or 100 years. I think the fashion these days is to say, well, the founders, we have to adapt the Constitution. We have to have a living Constitution because we know so much more than the founders now and we have a different worldview. But let's look at genetic engineering and the CRISPR technology that's coming along.
Yes.
Could we not envision a situation, we'll give it a generous amount of time for this technology to mature, let's say 100 years,
yes.
The year 2100. Could we not start raising a crop of bioengineered individuals who have been engineered to be president, that we've tweaked their intellect, we've tweaked their energy, we've tweaked their longevity, and those are the only ones who are constitutionally allowed to be president?
Well, you could make a case, which is an interesting thing to say here, is that if the complexities of computers and artificial intelligence may give us a lot of answers to different issues. So if you're trying to decide, well, carbon emissions, what do I do if I push this button and I'm going to raise the taxes or do this? What's the impact of that? And the complexities of decisions are not something the human mind, along those lines, can easily understand or apprehend. However, it brings up the possibility of machines can really give you answers pretty quickly. So if you have to make split-second decisions, the human part of the equation, maybe that's not so necessary, other than some kind of final checks and balances. The machines say blow place up, kind of like fail-safe.
Yes.
So you get into, that's a really crude in our present era to imagine fail-safe is such a funny idea that something so primitive could have this impact. But
yes.
the machines now are far more capable, and our dependence on them is so much greater. The human input into that, I wonder how much there is, and maybe it's good not to have too much human input into some things.
Well, that takes us in the other direction. With fail-safe, the problem was that that a circuit blew.
Yes.
But the problems that we are seeing now is not that the machine will break down, but that the machine will be too good at its job, that it will outthink its human masters. Ray Kurzweil, who's one of the leaders of the league in terms of artificial intelligence, says that at the rate the intelligence of machines is advancing, that sometime in the mid-21st century, I think the last time I checked it was like 2060 or something, we will reach what he calls the singularity point, at which the AIs will become so smart they don't need us anymore. And he calls it the singularity point because we can't see past it. We don't know what shape the world will be after that. For a more recent generation of watching, there are the Terminator films, there's Skynet, this idea that whatever this AI is, it will be either indifferent to us or hostile to us. And I think that's burned into the human consciousness so much that we would be reluctant to willingly give over the final decision. And I think no matter how smart an AI is, that ultimately there are so many variables in the world, it would come down to probabilities only. It couldn't look at every single variable and predict with a high degree of certainty what would happen. I think it could do it with a high level of probability. But I'm not sure that the human race would be willing to turn over its speciesist autonomy to something like that.
Well, he has a limit to human will. Possibly circumstances will just cause things to happen for which we as individuals won't really have that much control. Well, it's an interesting question we've gone into, and we could make some more comments on this. I'll just conclude by saying humans are quite fallible. As the brain ages, it gets more fallible. We have many senior people in our government that probably bear some attention. And I think the people need to understand. A very elderly leader has got some good things or bad things, but it could really be quite vexing and dangerous.
And I think that this problem is not going away, and we will face it as a reality at some point, and we need to prepare for it.
Maybe in our next election. Well,
thank
you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
This program is brought to you by the Georgia Neurosurgical Institute. For over 50 years, rendering neurosurgical care to patients of all social conditions, treating complicated problems involving the brain, spine, spinal cord, and peripheral nerves, endeavoring to encourage quality care, medical research, innovation, and education on a local, national, and international basis.